and welcome to Never Seen It Film Club. My name's Emma, and joining me, as always, I say it every week, but you must believe me, is the dapper, the dashing, the very handsome Robert J. Simpson from Cinepond.
Hello.
And we're here this week to discuss our concluding film from our last season, which was musical movies, the cult classics that inspired Broadway, as selected by you, our lovely film club members, and it was The Producers from 1967.
Don't forget the Checky. Can't produce plays without Checky. I'm happy.
That's very nice.
Picked the wrong play, the wrong director, the wrong cast. Where did I go right?
So, have you seen The Producers before?
Many times. This was probably of the films that we screened this season the one I knew best.
Cool.
I'm a bit of a Mel Brooks fan, which doesn't mean that, I think all this stuff is flawless and brilliant and he never steps wrong at all, because I think he does from time to time.
Spaceballs!
But this film I know fairly well. I hadn't seen it for a while. I'm also quite familiar with the remake, the later 2005 adaptation, and I listened to that score quite regularly. So I had that in my head more recently than I had this film in my head. So it's been a little bit of an interesting journey to kind of re-explore both of them.
Interesting, because I think I saw the remake first, which was Nathan Lane, Matthew Broderick and Uma Thurman, isn't that
That's
correct?
right, yeah.
So I saw that one first, and it's obviously the musical version. And then I think I saw the original version after that and was really surprised when it wasn't a full-blown musical, because I didn't know anything about it. And I was like, oh, the songs aren't in it. That's really strange. But I remember really enjoying how much drier the wit is in it, and all the slapstick feels more the comedy in it, and the physical comedy in it feels a lot more natural than it does in the new one. Because obviously I think some of the action and stuff in the remake is obviously emulating what's already come. But Producers is really interesting. I also wasn't aware that it was Mel Brooks' first feature film. Because I don't know why. I thought he had been really well established and stuff. And it's an interesting choice.
I mean, he was well established, but through television. I mean, he was a very accomplished scriptwriter and sort of creator anyway, and a comedian, and people knew his work. And he'd done quite a lot by that point. But this was his directorial debut. But this was followed very, very quickly by Blazing Saddles,
which is probably my favourite comedy film of all time.
I think of the two, it's probably the more accomplished. I mean, one of the criticisms that's levelled at this film on its initial release in 1967 is that Brooks as a screenwriter is great. As a comedian, he's a great talent. As a director, he's maybe not amazing. One of the criticisms that keeps on popping up is that he just lets his cast mug their way through far too much. And I mean, Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder for me are a great pairing. I think they're a much better pairing than Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick were. For me, it's Gene Wilder that makes a difference.
Yeah.
I think Matthew Broderick just it falls a bit flatter. But obviously was very, very accomplished. I mean, he did the Broadway version, then they did the film version. So he did what he had to do for that incarnation, and it ran and ran and ran.
Yeah.
So I can't fault that. And Nathan Lane is excellent.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the 2005 film, I do recommend it. Nathan Lane is worth the admission alone. But Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder are very different kind of performers, and there's, I think, a lot more energy to them. Gene Wilder in particular has this wonderful ability to go really, really soft and slow. And anyone that's seen Willy Wonka will know this. He kind of completely disarms you by going really gentle, and then suddenly it becomes really intense and over the top.
What is that, a handkerchief?
Nothing. That's nothing.
If it's nothing, why can't I see?
My blanket, my blue blanket. Give me my blue blanket.
Don't.
and that kind of manic, neurotic, possibly spectrum-y performance that's here, I think just does that really well, and that chemistry for me works. So all those criticisms of the fact that they kind of mug their way through.
What makes you think you can come in here and mug me off in front of my pals?
I don't know if it's really totally fair. Yes, I think some of the editing probably could be pruned slightly. The timing's maybe slightly off here and there. But the other thing is, when you're watching it, we're watching it cold. We're watching it, tend to be, you sit and watch it at home on your own, maybe with a couple of family members. There are gaps within comedy that are left for the audience's laugh. And I mean, the screening we watched on Saturday here, I mean, it wasn't rip-roaring hilarious. I think people didn't know what to make of it.
Yeah, there was definitely chuckles. And I think that's something that's easy to forget as a modern film audience, is that back in the day, like, it was the norm to leave those tiny gaps because you knew that the audience was going to laugh. It's actually a very theatrical approach to it.
Completely.
And a theatrical approach to directing, because you always will go, all right, there's going to be a big laugh here, so we don't want to continue because we don't want the next line to be missed, kind of a thing. So, yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. I think it's, as a modern editor, you would probably tighten everything up because you're expecting people to watch it by themselves, or with a few family members where you're probably you're probably half paying attention, versus editing for the cinema, watching as a joint experience, which is something that's really interesting, especially now. I was kind of talking about this earlier. Hopefully it's an organic segue, but we'll see.
No! It's
this segue.
They're not organic!
But the process of getting a film spec to cinema now has changed drastically, because it's not the cinema that people are creating content for. It's the streaming platform afterwards. So it's so interesting to watch films from, like, I know this is 67 and I'm like, so long ago. But from the kind of the age where cinema was where you watched films, not at home. Like, the television revolution had already happened by this point, but not for films. It was just it's just a great way of looking at a project, to be like, we're making this for a group experience versus a very singular experience that you would get now. But I have to say, like, watching it with a small crowd really did change it. Like, I know the jokes, I know where the content's going, and yet it still was really lovely to get, like, little guffaws, and, like, some of us were like, what the hell is going on? It's just interesting.
I mean, I got the impression that most of the room hadn't seen it before. Which is great. Means the agenda for this series is working. But I mean, that also meant that I think there's that element of the audiences in 1967 as well, where suddenly they're face to face with a glorification of the Nazis on stage.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty. Come and join the Nazi party.
And they're kind of going, you didn't just say that.
Yeah.
You can't. No.
What did he say?
And I felt there was maybe a little bit of that there as well, which was nice to kind of experience, because I know I was sitting there laughing away, knowing how inappropriate it is, and by the point you've got the sort of the dance numbers with the swastikas, there's something wonderfully distasteful but also brilliant about what Mel Brooks is doing with that. But I also know that it appalls people, because we know. I mean, the elevation of the Nazi regime is something that in 2023, unbelievably, we still have to deal with, and it treads a fine line between gross inappropriateness and wonderful sublime satire.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the nuance of that now compared to something like The Dictator, which in itself is, like, I think as I mean, there have been other movies that have tried to kind of, I think, for lack of a better word, tiptoe around kind of the subject matter of like how ridiculous extremism is. And it, obviously, like every good era, our villainies have shifted. Like in the 80s, it was the Russians.
Cocainum.
Like every action movie you watch, they were dealing with the red threat terror. It was English people for a long time in cinema.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
And now it's kind of like that kind of Middle Eastern, Iranian kind of thing.
We are Bashir rebels from the country of Somalia. Who are you? My name is Hakme. I'm a terrorist.
So you look at something like The Dictator, which is really appalling. I'm sorry if you're a Sacha Baron Cohen fan. I appreciate what he does, but that film makes me very angry because it was very expensive to make and
Spared no expense.
But looking at something like that, it's like that is the extreme we have that we kind of take into now. Whereas so it makes the producers look kind of gentle and like, look at us, wouldn't it be funny if there was like a play about these terrible people? But they don't address it like in your kind of very obscenely in your face way. Mm-hmm. But again, going into the headspace of if you were our age going to see that in '67, the war was like within living memory for some people, like for most of the audience.
Most of the audience, yeah.
So you would have definitely had like war veteran dads being like, "What the fuck is going on in the country?" Fucking Hitler on stage would have been. And especially that portrayal of Hitler must have been like either really triggering for some people or really fucking funny.
We were talking a bit about this on Saturday after the screening as well. I mean, I think that Hitler's an interesting character in terms of how we deal with our despots and our dictators, because I don't think we've done it so well since. I mean, maybe Team America's version of Kim Jong-un sort of is as close as we get. But Hitler, I think, first of all, it's the way the Nazi Party were very much in line with theatrics. You know, they were quite keen on their propaganda. Everything was for performance. It was theatre, and it was very instantly recognisable. Branding is excellent when it comes to the Nazis in the Reich. The thing that maybe set the Nazis apart and Hitler apart was that even at the time they were being parodied very, very closely. Mostly the biggest example is Charlie Chaplin and The Dictator. They happen to look very alike anyway. Mm-hmm. Born in the same month, in the same year, and that, I think, almost sort of set the path down. And there are, I think, nods to that even in this. But then wartime humour as well. There's an awful lot of sort of British comedy that deliberately pokes fun at the Nazis. That's how they dealt with it in terms of propaganda, was to kind of ridicule it and to mock it and to deal with that trauma in that kind of way. And I think that was maybe a European cultural thing. I mean, there is a bit whenever France is doing his big rant about Churchill and his rotting paintings.
That is because that you were taken in by that verdammte Allied propaganda. Such filthy lies, they told lies. With his cigars, with his brandy, and his rotten painting, rotten.
When he's doing that, he says, you're all blinded by the BBC.
Yeah.
Because that was the propaganda tool at the time. That was, it's a very European thing. And I think that if Mel Brooks hadn't been a Jew doing this film would never have got made at all. But there's a very Jewish sort of humour that also allowed them to deal with the Nazis and maybe they're not dealing with the Holocaust as such, but it's their way of kind of dealing with what was a deeply traumatic thing. And I think that's interesting because I don't think we've had it in quite the same way since. But Hitler has always been this point of ridicule. And it's only now, I think, that... I was going to say it was now, we don't, but even something like Jojo Rabbit, just a few years ago, that they're still using Hitler as an object of parody and allowing that fear to kind of be there. So glorifying the Nazis and then sort of using it in a satirical way, I think is there's probably a lesson in there for us all. I
think so. It'll be interesting to see in the next kind of 20 years if the same things happen to American leaders like Trump.
I don't know. I think that we've... I think that our way of dealing with it has changed, and I think, for all the talk about snowflakes and sort of millennials and all the rest of it, I think there has been a cultural shift away from this, and we've sort of lost our teeth.
I think people are very, very afraid to be caught in the PC wars that are going on. So it's like someone can be a part. Like, I think what's actually an interesting kind of comparison, don't come for me, Twitter, Tumblr, whoever you are, is Andrew Tate. Like Andrew Tate, with his supreme following of man babies. Has been parodied and kind of like has this reverence on the internet that it's almost, if you even question him a little bit, you've got one half screaming at you because you shouldn't make jokes about such an abhorrent person, and then on the other side you've got people who are his followers who scream at you because he is our fearless leader and don't go near him. So it's almost like you can't win for win there. And I think it's very similar when it comes to like world leaders and stuff. I think because culturally all of our hate goes to basically people who live on the internet because they're because you can talk directly to them. So you can leave a YouTube comment, you can tweet at somebody, you can make a parody TikTok and tag them in it. You can't do that with Putin at the moment. I mean, you maybe can if you're so inclined in Russian circles. I don't know what the Russian equivalent of TikTok is, but I think because all of our hate and malice exists online now, well, a good part of it exists online and so direct, I think we've lost the nuance of satire a little bit.
I mean, I think the other issue is that you have people who are not directly impacted by the people that they want to parody and lambast, whereas, again, a lot of that humour that came out during the wartime was people who were having to fight anyway, who had faced the grim realities of the regime firsthand, who had very real triggering experiences. I mean, Spike Milligan's excellent series of novels about, his memoirs and the way that the goons in particular kind of dealt with that kind of stuff afterwards. I mean, Hitler regularly turns up on the work of Milligan and Peter Sellers. I think because of what they'd experienced, again, the Jewish thing, when you are a member of the race that Hitler tried to eradicate, I think that gives you a different stance and a different ability to go out and say, this isn't someone we want to go and lambast. I think, I suppose right now for Putin, it's going to have to come from somewhere like the Ukraine. It's going to have to come from a Ukrainian to really kind of engage that, unless the war goes wider. Trump was a bit different. I mean, a lot of America felt very strongly and were able to kind of comment on that. But I think that without that sort of immediacy, without, we don't have conscription anymore. We don't have people fighting in the same way anymore. So it kind of numbs us a little bit. And I think it sort of removes our right, in a way, to kind of interrogate these things through humour and through critique. I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule either, though. I mean, if somebody out there wants to go and produce something excellent, please do, and then send me the links because I'd like to watch it or read it or whatever. But I do think that's maybe why it's changed, why it is that we don't have that same kind of bitey attack.
Yeah, lived experience is definitely something that a lot of us don't have a right to. I think the fact that we watch everything that's happening in the Ukraine from the safety of a screen definitely eradicates any comment from some people. But yeah, I think you're right. I think if there is going to be the producers to Electric Boogaloo starring Vladimir Putin's regime, it will have to come from. It would come from a Ukrainian kind of point of view. I think that we are spoiled little Westerners sometimes, and we just get to sit and watch everything on the BBC podcast. But that would be an interesting perspective. I'd quite like to see like a Korean version of the producers.
Yeah, but when we do find different things to attack. I mean, we're in Northern Ireland. I mean, Northern Irish comics are obsessed with the Troubles and our politicians, because that's what we have our first-hand experience of. That's where we feel personally attacked. That's where we can kind of pick apart the flaws within the regimes. So I mean, that's everything's very regionalised. Just this happens to be dealing with a story, partly with a story that was global. And I mean, in 1967, critics were in part appalled, but also in part praising what was going on. I think it, again, depended maybe on your context. And I think there's that little element of, you know, if you were younger, perhaps, maybe you didn't feel that that was appropriate because you didn't remember what had gone on. You know, you'd heard the stories and you're horrified by it. You feel like this isn't something we can actually joke about, but actually that was a way of healing. But I mean, this isn't just a film about the Nazi regime either. No, this is a film about Hollywood, and it's a film about Broadway and about that system too.
What I find most interesting about it is literally the producing end of it. It's like, let's make a flop, because honestly, if you've tried to do an Arts Council funding application form in the last 6 months, it is really tempting just to try and commit fraud, because it's difficult to get money.
For legal reasons, that's a joke. For legal reasons, that's a joke.
It is difficult to get projects funded. It's something that constantly, I mean, it's one of those things that has never changed since the dawn of time. It's like, without the arts societies wither and die. It's the truth. But we're not viable investment. We're not business opportunities. We're not seen as important enough to put the almighty dollar behind sometimes. So like going up and being like, please just give me £20 for my show, it'd be great.
Everybody loves my painting, now give me my money.
Feels very much like that sometimes. So I do fully appreciate that, you know, seducing old ladies might seem corrupt, but hey, they get a good time. I get my play produced. I have a lovely, like, photo of them on my desk that makes them feel happy and joyful. Is it really committing a crime to give an old lady happiness if I'm defrauding her of her fortune? It definitely is. But, I mean, it is a good game plan.
Now I want my money. I have to buy a wine.
It's not ethically or morally correct, but, I mean, hey, you got to do what you got to do.
There's a court scene in that where, you know, I think it's fairly clear that the little old ladies are completely complicit with being boned by Zero Mostel. I mean, they don't mind giving the money for it. That's okay. It's role play. It's fun. I'm sure that they're far more savvy than you know, by making those checks out to cash than we might want to believe. But I mean that is a satire in terms of the way that the producing system works. I mean, you see that most notably with film, where there are films that have made millions and millions of dollars that apparently have never turned a profit, and so the people who are supposed to get paid have never got paid from those films. I mean, this is the same with Broadway. I mean, it's fascinating that side of it exists, and again, this was one of the things that came out as criticism for this film in '67, was that perhaps it was filled with too many in-jokes to a system that most people in the outside world didn't understand, because the average viewer doesn't know how. They don't know how the sausage is made. And this was a film about how the sausage is made.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, you've got that experience from having... I'm not going to continue the analogy.
Yeah, I was just like, no, it's just sausage is made, old ladies.
But I mean, when you've worked in to some extent within that industry, you have a better idea about how it's constructed and what goes on. Whereas, you know, I could pick a couple of my friends who've never had any involvement in theatrics or cinema or anything, and they wouldn't have a clue. And so a lot of it is going to go past their heads, and it's quite navel-gazing in that respect. It just so happens that I quite like it.
I like the fact that the casting couch is reversed for once. So it's not. it is like Max is like this big, larger than life like person who should be off seducing Swedish receptionists, but has to, you know, be lowering himself to role play the Contessa and the driver. Is that correct? For like Mrs. So and so that he gets checky. Can't make play without checky.
Don't forget the checky. Can't produce plays without checkies.
There's something that's quite nice about seeing, and I know it's done for laughs, and I know there is like they are the oldest of old ladies, but there is something quite refreshing about seeing like older women being portrayed as sexual beings and like getting their jollies with what they perceive as a virile young man, and I'm like, that's kind of fun and interesting to see it the other way around for once. But I'm like, I don't know how he very clearly does not have the stamina. He does sweat quite a lot. But
there are an awful lot of old ladies that he's going through. So, I mean, I think he can be forgiven for needing some recovery time.
Yeah. Maybe just a few more power naps and he'd be okay.
Also, I mean, you know, the older you get, the more lubrication is important. And I feel that was massively underplayed in this. So that may also be contributing.
It's true. It's true. I actually just really enjoyed the playfulness of the opening and the style. And the fact that Springtime for Hitler just makes its way through every part of the underscore.
I mean, really nice. Part of that, I suppose, is possibly Mel Brooks' background within television, feeding through, you know, the kind of the prologue to any serial is there.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, this started off life as a novel before it became a play, before it became a film script. You know, so it's also had that kind of genesis, and it sort of feels like, I mean, that's where it feels like a play, where you're coming in and you're straight into the action, and you're, you know, it's setting up the scenarios quite nicely. It is, I think, quite theatrical. I mean, I know it's a film about theatre, but there's something about its presentation that even then, it's a surprise that it took him 30-odd years to adapt it for the stage. It feels like it's ready to go in 1967.
Oh, 100%. This feels like a stage play that's been adapted for the media that it's in. So it does feel very there's definitely like intentional like little quips and like nods to Broadway, but it's definitely a filmmaker's film as well. I feel like the energy of it, some of the shots that are used are great. The color palette for this film is awesome as well. Like, I really enjoy how the world, like, you look at Max's office, it's drab, but in the best kind of drab way. It's so over the top, and then you go from that to the opulence of Springtime for Hitler as a dance number, which is, honestly, I'm like, you should never whistle Springtime for Hitler or hum it or sing it out loud, but you can't help it. Anytime someone says Springtime to me, I have to finish it with For Hitler, and then people go, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Springtime for Hitler and Germany.
It's not what it seems. It's not what it seems. But yeah, it is. It's there's like just attention to detail that a theatre maker would do to this film, which I really appreciate. And then, yeah, again, if the world feels quite contained, but it doesn't feel small, which I appreciate, because there's the moments in the park and things like that kind of open up the world. But ultimately, it's set in New York, but you wouldn't. Like, there's not the kind of cliche of New York that you would see. There's not big sweeping wide shots that take us down Broadway Avenue for like 10 minutes that you probably get now. You know, there's a nod, there's a taxi cab, and there's location shots that are like, oh, this is definitely Broadway. But I do just really appreciate how it, like, as you said, it feels like the world of theatre being shown to us on screen, which is really nice.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's what I really like about it is its depiction of sexuality. I think it feels very advanced for 1967. I mean, I was chatting to someone about this the other day, and the whole context about, you've got very openly gay characters within this, and yet 1967 is the year that homosexuality is legalized in the UK. So this is coming out at a real kind of sort of crux moment, and it's like a real kind of tipping point. And it's surprising to kind of see that, you know that, and it's not even that it's hidden. It's not layered within code or anything else. It is very apparent that Roger Debris has a common law partner. Yeah. You know, that they're literally together. It's very, very camp. You've got cross dressing in here. You know, there are slang words used as well that make very, very clear the sexuality of characters. Like, it's interesting to kind of see that portrayed, but also, I mean, that is theatre. Like, theatre has always attracted a more diverse sexuality, and to present that, I think, is so openly. Has to be a positive thing, and I don't think it's presented actually in a terribly negative way. No,
I was going to say, I'm like, Mel Brooks is somebody to me who, yes, there might be problematic in our modern lens kind of presentation of gay people. Like, they're very camp. There's a lot of makeup. They're not the butt of the joke, though. They have the power in that scene. You know, the joke is that, oh, he likes you, you should go and do that. And, like, Gene Wilder's afraid because this powerful gay man is in front of him being like, you have to, you know, treat me like one of your French girls. And again, it's that nice reversal of, like, a heterosexual man being made to be uncomfortable, being treated like a woman would be treated, which I kind of like. But there's not a big stick being poked fun at homosexuality or queerness in this. It's they're funny, but again, I don't think it would be just as much nowadays, but they have the power, which is interesting.
Yeah, they have the power. I mean, I think sex as a kind of means to get what you want within this industry is what becomes very clear from the film, because I mean, sex is used across the age groups, across the genders. I think actually it's quite interesting to see Leo Bloom, Gene Wilder's kind of development as well, because he starts off very, very not comfortable with being touched.
Yep.
You know, you've got the blanket, you know, he's freaking out because someone's in his purse. You're in his personal space. He can't deal with that. He tries to push Max Bialystock away from him. Then when you've got that scene with Roger Debris, again, he's freaked out because Roger's wearing a dress. Then he really doesn't want to engage with the kind of touching there. But by the time you get to the point where it's the first night of Springtime for Hitler on stage, there is a point where he leans over and he kisses Max on the face. And that, to me, is a great progression in terms of how comfortable and how much he's actually bedded himself into that world. You know, and his inhibitions are lowering down along with everyone else's. That I think is, again, quite a positive and a very subtle thing. There's also a lovely moment during the auditions where Roger's assistant reaches out and touches his hand just while they're watching the kind of the auditionees. And I just think that's a really nice, very obvious nod to the sexuality that seems to just be pushing a little bit at the boundaries that existed at that point for something that's going to be. This isn't like this was aimed at sort of general cinemas. This wasn't aimed at sort of like very exclusive revenue, you know, spaces. This is for everybody. So it's again, I think it's, for me, it feels quite progressive. And yes, those extremes are sort of brought down a little bit for the 2005 version, but those kind of stereotypes all exist within the community anyway, so it's not that unrealistic. Yeah, and again, even if you look at like talking about sex and sexuality, the way women are portrayed in this film, like there's not real. Where it falls down a little bit is there's not like an out-and-out, fully fledged female lead character. No. And that's a shame. Like, even the Swedish secretary, she is very obviously playing like a role. Like, she's fully aware of what she's doing. She owns her. It's not that she's doing it against her will. It's like it's her choice. Like, she goes and does it. And again, I think even Uma Thurman in the new version is played a bit smarter and like a little bit more intellectually. She has lines. Yeah.
When you go teeth, flaunt teeth, step right up and strut your stuff.
I do think that the fact that you have a very beautiful woman, especially in 1967, own her own sexuality, own her own body, even if it's for the wrong reasons, and it is very much played as a, you know, she's eye candy for the office, but I'm like, she's doing like, I'm like, she's getting paid to do nothing, and is kind of, again, the power dynamic of that relationship of both between her, Max, and Leo. It's like she's always the one in charge. It's not that she is being forced to do anything, which I find really interesting. And then on the flip side of that, as we've already spoken about, old ladies being in charge of their own sexuality. When have you ever seen that on screen? Again, played a little bit for laughs, but I never feel bad for the old women. I feel like they are getting what they pay for. I never feel bad for them. I'm like, fair dues, get it, girl. If you want to get it, get it. I mean, like, there's no harm in it. Like, and again, how many movies have we seen, media have we seen, where it's perfectly acceptable for an older man, an older gent to go off and have a trophy wife or pay for somebody's company, but get it. I mean, why not? So again, I don't feel like there's, like, it would be nice if there was a fully fleshed, proper, like, female character. But again, of its time, for 1967, I'm like, do you know what? The women in this are not victims, to my eyes. So, get it, girl, is essentially what I think. Yeah, whatever. Oh, that was awkward. But sexuality is definitely, like, sex and sexuality is flooded through this film, which I think is, again, it's all really positive. It's not seen as, like, this gross, dirty thing. It's like, it exists, and of course it exists, and we shouldn't ignore it.
But I mean, you're hitting the summer of love. It's 67 to 69 is the golden era for sexual liberation. Everything's changing. You got the onset of the pill, abortion being legalized. You know, there's a lot more freedom. To the point where we've got, you know, LSD's love power number. You know, he very much represents an attitude of that time. So I you know, it's of its moment. But I think it has a resonance that still works today.
I think so, and I think we bang about this a lot on this show. I think we've said it several times. I'm like, it's really important to take these films in context of the times that they were created. So yes, to us it might feel a bit one-sided. And kind of, you know, overly sexualizing people and, like, making light. But I'm like, but if you see this, compare it to the content that was coming out at the time, I think it's great that you have, like again, this, I don't think it's something that Mel Brooks as a writer or a director has ever shied away from, is putting sex at the front of, because that's ultimately what sells in Hollywood, in the theatre. It's what we are selling most of the time. If you're not doing, even in Blazing Saddles, like the Madeleine Kahn character, she is a sex object essentially, but she's not, because she is fucking hyper powerful. She makes all the decisions. I mean, Hetty uses her, like, he asks her to do things and pays her well for it, but she's not impressed with him whatsoever. She takes the lead on her own thing, and I'm sorry, but I'm Tired is genuinely one of my favourite songs to come out of a film of all time, so I will not have bad things said about Madeleine Kahn, because she is a genius. And even if you look at Young Frankenstein, and Please Don't Touch Me, it's great. Again, it's women saying, look all you want, but you'll not, like, it's my decision. And I think that the theme of consent that runs through Mel Brooks films, it's actually really refreshing, especially taking in context that it was the 60s. So...
Yeah, I'll agree, and I think those elements are still running into his more recent work. I don't know if you watched the History of the World Part 2 on, I can't remember which streaming service it's available on, but I mean, there's still elements of that within his stuff. I mean, it's there. I think it's one of those more subtle things that maybe you don't notice at first time, but it's definitely there. But yeah.
Well, all in all, I think the producers gets a thumbs up from the both of us. I've sort of never seen it for me, and I've seen it all the time for Robert.
Seen it all the time. I'll probably watch it again.
I think I will too. It was a lovely end to our season. I think it was really, it's one that I did kind of maybe illegally sneak in there, because I just think it's worth watching. I know, it's rigged, guys. All of it's rigged. It's not. Please vote the next season. But I wanted to make sure that this film in particular, we did show, because it is, I think, comedically, thematically, just being a great film in general for this season. It's definitely worth watching, but people haven't had the opportunity to see it as frequently as the actual musical version that's from 2005.
Well, that's actually harder to get your hands on at the moment, unless you rent it. But it is the only one from the season that has gone through the whole cycle, that started off as a film, it's been adapted for a Broadway, and then has been adapted back into a musical film. I don't think any of the others have had that subsequent adaptation, so it's quite interesting to watch one that's done the whole circle.
It's literally done the loop. Which is quite good. But it's been a great journey of a season. I'm really excited that we got the opportunity to see such a varied list of films, which is what I really liked about the picks that you went for, because we've had everything from horror to documentary to comedy to family films to just everything, which has been one of my favourite things about the film club, is how we genuinely seem to want to see a broad spectrum of stuff, so that's great. Which, speaking of which, our next season is going to be very exciting. Drum roll. The members voted for Z-List, the best of the worst. So that will be our next season, which will start in August. For you guys here on YouTube, yes, the next season is going to be Z-List, the best of the worst, which is going to be a very interesting season. I'm very excited to talk about some of the films that we have in mind for that. It's going to be great. You're really going to enjoy it. Thank you, as always, for supporting us and supporting what we do, because, you know, we're a tiny little club and we're trying our best because film's great, isn't it? We all love it. So you can follow us, subscribe and like us. That all helps if you can't join the film club. You can follow Accidental Theatre everywhere as Accidental Theatre, except on Twitter where we're Accidental T. And you can follow Cinepunked and Robert at...
Cinepunked you'll get at Cinepunked, Cinepunked, most places apart from Instagram where we're Cinepunked Film, and then as for me, just hunt my name out. I'm on all sorts of things.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye! Hey guys, thanks for watching. My name's Emma from Accidental Theatre. This is Robert J. Simpson from Cinepunked, and we run Never Seen It Film Club, the film club where we watch films you've never seen. We'd really appreciate it if you could come and join in to our membership program, where you can come and see a lovely film in our beautiful book bar every month, and it costs just £3 a month, and it's amazing. The membership button should be right about here, so if you're just there, and if you can't join the membership, that's no problem, just like and subscribe to the channel.